Hello everyone and welcome to the LangShack. So today we're going to be talking about the Tuscarora language, which is native to central North Carolina, and there's parts of it that go out to the coast, like that Smithfield, Goldsboro area, if you're familiar with this state. Basically just on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And they have had historically an Atlantic port, at least on the Tuscarora Nation maps. So it does appear that they had some access to the sea in their traditional lands. So let's move on. So the table of contents here. So we're going to be talking about the varieties and dialects of this language. We'll be talking about the sound system or its phonetics. And then we'll also talk about the sentence order, which is quite free, but not as free as many languages. We'll also talk about the polysynthetic nature of the language, because it's more polysynthetic than your average glunative language. And then we'll also talk about how nouns are formed and structured as well. And then we're also going to be talking about pronouns and possession, which work on an alienability-based system. And then we're going to talk about locatives, verb structure, adjectives, and then interrogatives or question words after that. So, what do you need to know about the Tuscarora language? Well, the Tuscarora language it's a Northern Iroquois language, which is in the same group as Mohawk, Seneca, and some of those other languages as well. And it also has two varieties that are spoken today in its mother version. So there's a Lewiston, New York version, and there's also an Ontario, or Ontarian in Canada version. So both of these varieties make up the modern Tuscarora language. And it all got started in North Carolina in the Tuscarora War of 1711 to 1715. And in that war, after that war, they were dispersed. And there were many Tuscaroras that stayed in traditional Tuscarora country down here. And the ones that ended up staying eventually made the Tuscarora Nation at Maxton, North Carolina. And there's a Tuscarora Nation North Carolina website that you can see right here. And this will give you more information about the ones that stayed and that were here. So there's been a lot of contention between the nation that moved up to New York and the nation that stayed down here. And I've seen a lot of debate going back and forth about how they weren't considered Tuscaroras, the ones that stayed in North Carolina, because the bulk of the tribe had moved away. However, I have relatives that literally worked with Tuscarora people like in the 70s and 80s down here, so there's definitely evidence that they're still here in North Carolina. I just could not tell you the differences between the Tuscarora varieties that they stayed speaking down here versus what the two varieties up north evolved into. But they're quite different. And the other thing about this language is that compared to Cherokee, which is a Southern Iroquois language also native to North Carolina, it is a Southern Iroquois language, so it's quite different from the rest of the Iroquois languages, at least in this area. And because they joined Haudenosaunee, which is the Iroquois Confederacy, it may have taken some borrowings from those nearby other languages. So it's kind of difficult to say what is from Mohawk, Seneca, etc., and what is Tuscarora. And I haven't seen any word comparisons between Cherokee and Tuscarora, but it's considering that it's like the Southern versus the Northern Iroquois branches, the Southern Iroquois must have split off at least 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. So it would basically be the equivalent of like English to Hindi, how Hindi has like a whole different syntax than English does. So a lot of things have changed in that time between these two languages. So Tuscarora is in a very, I'm not going to say precarious situation, but it can be difficult to track what is Tuscarora and what's not whenever you look at what is really common between them. Could be Sprockboon stuff as well. So, speakers and dialects, as well as speaker info. So, as I mentioned before, there's 2 regional variations today. There's a Lewiston, New York version, and there's also a Six Nations version. The Six Nations version is the Ontario dialect that they speak, or Ontarian. And the main differences between these 2 dialects is that there's a th sound used in Lewiston, New York, which corresponds to a s in Ontario. And there's sometimes different word choices in a lot, and as you'll see in the next slide, many of the words like may have come from the same source, but they've evolved in the past 300 years since the war ended and the separation and disbursement began. And the other thing as well is that, at least on the Tuscarora Nation North Carolina website, they mentioned that they were at one point a single coherent nation with Nottoway and the Meherrin people. So those, I'm not sure how related those were, or like how related their languages were. I haven't seen any evidence about it, but there are other linguists that agree with that assessment. And as far as mutual intelligibility goes, I personally kind of doubt that they are fully understandable, but the evidence, or not the evidence, but the sources kind of say that they are understandable across communities. Most of the research that has been done for this has been based out of the Lewiston, New York variety. For both the dictionary that Rudy Blair's did, as well as the grammar that Mattoon did. So in this variation chart, you can kind of see how you have all these are pretty basic words, right? And you can kind of see how some of them look kind of sort of similar, like, ooh, eh. And this is like the in and hint, or like a nasal sound, like heh, or hen, kind of like if you're trying to say like a French in, it's kind of sort of like that with the Ogonek. And in Tuscarora, or rather the official New York Nation, upstate New York Nation, there's some agreement. So this is basically the same word, but then there's a ch right here. And then horn is pretty, utra versus awentra. So you can still see that similarity. Same with neck and ribs. There's some stuff going on. And then when you get to like star and sun, and especially for the word for sun, you can see how much they diverge. I almost can't even see how the 2 are related. Besides this, like I'm not even 100% sure I can see a connection between these. So these are probably 2 different words. This could be from a different language or borrowed from something, or these 2 dialects simply really did just make, like, they have seriously just evolved their own words into this. So there's a lot of possibilities here. But the only word that's like really the same is the word for it is good. And it is long. At least you can see how Ewis and Ewith, you can see that connection there. So at least you can see the root in the word. But just looking at this and the fact that all these words are very basic, some of these are even Swadesh words like star and sun, possibly sand. These are very basic words, and you can already see how much they diverged. So it makes me doubt the mutual intelligibility fully, but the dictionary also, it makes it look like it's pretty standard. So I'm not 100% sure about it. On to the revitalization situation. So the Tuscarora Nation runs a program called NTLP, which is basically the acronym of this long word right here, which I could say it if it were broken down, but I'm not going to tip this because it's very long. Tuscarora language program. So an organization called Bundled Arrows Incorporated runs it, which might be owned by the Tuscarora Nation. I have no idea. But this website right here, nationalccrs.org right here, this website, they run a program. It's a 40-week, 30-hour-week program. And as far as I know, the Tuscarora Nation is paying Tuscarora Nation teachers, or people that want to become teachers, to teach at the elementary school called Tuscarora Elementary School, which is also located in Lewiston, New York. they want them to run the program entirely in Tuscarora. So they go through an intense program like this, and they basically come out fluent. Like, I was looking at the curriculum. Well, not the curriculum, but what is expected. Like what the prerequisites were for the program. And I was looking at, like, the first one and the second one, and you have to have 5 years of experience just to get into the second program, the second program. So level 2 of the program. So it's a pretty intense program, but they want to make damn sure that you're going to be fluent when you get out of the program, or at least be able to hold, a conversation and express your thoughts very deeply, and get as close to English level proficiency as you can. Now on to the phonology and the phonetics. So Tuscarora has a pretty straightforward sound system. There's no foreign sounds that English speakers can't handle, right? Like, we pretty much all these are in English. Like, we have the th and think, t, s. We got ch, k, yo, and then we have the oh, that thing. So looking at this, you can see that we have all these sounds. The only one that might be a little bit strange to us or an English speaker, is the tap. The tap is similar to the pero and the r in Spanish, but this can also kind of sort of be like, it can be similar to the tap in the double T in bottle, or the T in water, or the double D in lather. So there are cases where that might be very similar, but I believe I've also seen that it can be pronounced as like a rhotic sound. There is a small Tuscarora audio dictionary. It's only got like 56 words, if I'm not mistaken. It's only got like a few dozen words in there, but you can listen to some of the words, and you can kind of pick up the pronunciation, like where the stress goes and what this R actually is like. I'm not sure if I actually listened to any words with this sound, but there are recordings of a lot of different words there. And then the phonology, vowels. So I didn't really study too much of the vowels and the sound change occurrences that happen in this language, only because the sound change occurrences are very complex, and the vowels are literally different for the East and the West, and this language is quite a complex language, of polysynthetically speaking. So you will see here on this chart that we have the E's and we have the W's. So the E's are going to be representing the Eastern dialect. The Eastern dialect, I'm assuming, is the Lewiston, New York variety. The W is going to refer to the Ontario. I really, really, really wish we had documentation about the North Carolina dialect, or what, like, that would be so nice. Or at least, like, how it evolved, or did it just stay the same? I would really love to know that information, but there's nothing. I mean, you can see here that, like the Western dialect, they have a sound, and then the Eastern dialect, well, I don't know if this is Eastern, this might be both, because only some of these are specific, but, they have an only in the Western, and then you have all these other kinds of sounds, like only in the Eastern, and they have some other kind of I'm not sure if there's a difference between these or not. They have the same IPA symbol, so they might be the same. And then you also have a couple of these. So these could simply be, I don't want to say they're simply spelling differences, but when I see the IPAs like the same, it kind of makes me think that they're just spelling conventions when you look at it in depth. But anyway, so now we're going to talk about the sound change occurrences just a bit. We're not going to go too deep into this because it's very complicated. I mean, you can look at this and you can look at this and you can just see for yourself that you will have to be like immersed in the phonological notes, like the notes about the sound system that Mattoon left, or you would have to like be looking at the dictionary. You would have to like be studying examples of when sounds change, and I would probably make examples myself from the dictionary and just try to replace words in the grammar that match that same class of words. and just try to learn the sound change rules. That's how I would do it personally, but everybody's got their own way to learn. But what's really cool about this is that a lot of these, despite this being a quote-unquote new world language, it's fascinating how even over on the completely different side of languages that were never in contact with, they were never in contact with Africa or with Europe or North Africa, or any of that, like any of those civilizations, and they still have these same sound change things. Like everybody who studied languages, like a variety of languages, knows that k is the hardened version of g, or that s and sh can sometimes be that same thing, or the t and the d, or the k and the aspirated k, or the e and the y, like Arabic does with the y sound in different positions whenever it's depending on the length of the vowel. I don't think I've seen a th before, but it does make sense. So that's what I found very cool, is that these sounds they're still the same sound change occurrences that happen with a lot of languages around the world. So it's cool. I've never really studied languages from the United States very, very much, outside of like phrases and things. Like I've never really gotten into the nitty-gritty of stuff, so it's fascinating to me. And then this one, I honestly I just tried to write this how I understood it, but it's just very complicated. I'm not going to be able to like memorize this stuff. I'm just taking notes from the linguist source here, but I just wanted to show this because it just goes to show you that the language has not only its own way to automatically fix illegal sound combinations, essentially, but it figures all these different things out whenever like lots of sound change occurrences happen. And this really does happen mainly whenever morphemes bump into each other. Like these kind of sound occurrences can happen outside of those, but there's also this thing that they put in called a joiner. So you'll have like a stem that ends in a consonant, and then you'll have another stem that might start in a consonant. And in order to be able to say both of those in the same word, which could be a long word, they add this joiner in there, which is usually an ah sound. So the language has a very complex way of changing sounds and making things sound better. They have their own self-correcting system for that. So now we're going to talk about the syntax now. So this language generally has a subject, verb, object, sentence order. So this is very you can see this in a lot of the different examples. However, there are a couple of other acceptable syntaxes that you can use when you're talking about this. In Tuscarora, the morphology basically does the heavy lifting, right? It's not so dependent on the position of the word. It's really dependent on what's in the verb. As you're going to see much later in this presentation, when we talk about the structure of verbs, you're going to see that they put all the pronoun stuff and all the objects that you need to work with, all the subjects and objects, basically everything that's going to work in the sentence is going to be in the first position of the verb. Okay? So, wa is like, it's their version of the aorist, I have also seen this for objects. Like you can, like, if there's some kind of, like there's a it that's going on, right? Like there's an example, wakit kane, which means I chase it, and that wa is used in that aorist position. And then the hra is simply a masculine, so there was a masculine character in there, and kind of surprised there's no human, because they have a human prefix that you could put on here, or at least a human like stem that you could put right there, because there's also non-human as well. But you put everything in this part right here, and now whenever a Tuscarora speaker hears it, they're going to know that there's some thing or some animal that's involved, and then that there's a human, there's a male that's involved in this. So you can do So you could express it. You could express it like "We're in Oaxaca, sir," and then you can also change it up as well, and put the object at the front, which is quite unusual for a lot of languages. And you could do, unless you're speaking poetically or something. It just depends on the language, but I haven't studied a lot of languages with this word. And sir, being the dog, they still know and they still understand it as William saw a dog. So I've always thought that. I have always thought that was really cool. Whenever you can like have free syntax like that and still understand. But this right here, the verb tells you everything that you need to know. And then you can even do it like this, where you put the verb at the front and then everything comes after it. I don't think it would be acceptable to do VOS, at least Mattoon. I believe Mattoon she either doesn't mention it, or it's not really a common syntax. Like, she didn't see that in her research and her samples. So, yeah, it just shows you it's very flexible. Not quite as free as a language like Lenape, where you can basically put the words anywhere as long as all the elements of the words are met, for the most part. But Tuscarora is a little bit more strict with the sentence order than that. Alright, so this is probably going to be the most important part of the entire presentation. And I only say that because this language is more polysynthetic than your average polysynthetic language. So they pack a lot of information into words, and you're going to see why here in this bit. So Tuscarora can put entire sentences in a word, and they can also create complex verbs that look like they're stringing together in one word. There are obviously standalone words, mainly interrogatives and specific nouns. And if you have nouns that stand by themselves, even those are going to be very long. Like, for example, the word for house is nus, which I believe you might see the word later in this presentation. But if you want to say you can't be like, yeah, nus means house. You could tell someone that nus is the stem for house, but you would have to say onese, because o is a non-human object, and nus is obviously house, and then you have to put the nominalizer at the end to turn it into a noun. So, you can have standalone words like that, but you have to follow the rules of the polysynthetic nature of Tuscarora in order to be able to do that. So in this example, we have kanequotiati, which means I cook. Literally, I make food for myself. Make food for myself. So this would be like I, and this would be myself, essentially. And this is cook, making food, and this is to you. And this is something, the serial here at the end just lets the Tuscarora speaker or listener know that this is something that you do on a regular basis. It's an ongoing action. And all of that means I cook. Now we're going to talk about noun structure and formation, which goes back to the polysynthetic rules that Tuscarora has. So you can build nouns from verbs, and you can actually stick those onto other verbs as well. The great thing about Tuscarora, like many Native American languages, there are no articles. So no the, no a or an. You don't have to worry about that. So context essentially will tell you if it is definite or not. Context is everything in those, in that long, like the verb will tell you most of what needs to happen in a sense. And there's also this distinction between, as I was mentioning earlier, between human and non-human, and there's also masculine and feminine. I believe that human versus non-human distinction, it appears to matter more than masculine and feminine. And there's also other things like they have dual, they have plural. There's a lot of stuff, but that's basically how it goes. So the noun is created from three things. You have the front of it, which is pronominal. So you have stuff like non-humans. You put your objective and stuff at the front, and then you put the stem, the main stem that delivers the main meaning. And then you put the nominalizers that go at the end. So you see nominalizer plus nominal suffix. nominalizer, and then this. I'm not exactly sure why fast is going after that and not going before it, but that's just how they're constructing it. For the most part, that appears to be the way that it's constructed, because food and set are like in the middle of the word here. Food joiner set, and this is I marked this in the wrong color. But that which food is put on is a table, and the thing which drags and goes fast is an automobile. So they put a perfective after this because I'm assuming it describes the action that a car does, and there's no verb thing here. No verb stems or anything like that, like a perfective or a serial or something else like that. It just refers to an object that's there. So all these, it's always very fascinating how Tuscarora creates new nouns. All right, now we're going to talk about pronouns and possession now in this section. So different possession systems use different noun types. So inalienable possession is essentially something that can be taken away from you, whereas inalienable is something that's a part of you. So in these examples, my house in my hand, you can see that these prefixes are pretty similar between the two. So you can tell like kaye and kako and neyako, neyako and neye, ka e ra, and you still see that akoro, and then these second person singular, plural, and dual forms are pretty much the same. The fact that you have us right here for the singular and right here, there may have been two different speakers that gave these examples. Not 100% sure there. And then in the first person is perhaps the most different, but T, you have k and you have T, so you still have k, you still have the k from Akanasoa, my house, and then the dual, which is our hand. So, and there's no there doesn't appear to be a first person plural for inalienable stuff, because while it's possible to, they may do something like add the distributive stem to make it a collective noun, essentially, which is what they do for the word for house, or our various houses, as you'll see later in this presentation. So body parts essentially use one system, and regular nouns will use another one. And there's a three-way. This is essentially a three-way number system. So singular, dual, plural, singular, dual, plural. And locatives. So locatives are basically just expressing the location in the word, saying where something is happening at. So this is pretty simple. You just add ke, and you get this at and on that thing type of meaning. So it's very fascinating how a word like bridge end means under the bridge. So you're not on the bridge, or not at the bridge, you're under the bridge. You're at the location of the bridge, but that specifically means under the bridge. This is probably the most different from the rest of them in the examples I've seen, because most of them are like in or at, and there's also akon, or it's like akon or something like that. It means like near something. But you can kind of tell here too that there's a ke, and I believe, I'm not sure if this is this a joiner? Not exactly. Actually, yeah, the is a joiner. because in this example, in the water, there's no ah here because this is a cat in the water. And you can kind of see where they come from as well here. But you just put this nominal suffix after the word for road, and then you put the locative on, and you slap the locative on there. The same with here, with these. So uha, yeah, uha, uhan, uhana. So pretty simple, pretty easy. And this can get you a lot of different things. I have not seen if there's like a standalone preposition like there is in like Lenape, for example, which is not an Iroquoian language. It's an Algonquin language. But a lot of polysynthetic languages tend to have similar ways of doing locatives. Like locatives will go at the end of things. Like even in Turkish, which is literally across the world, you're still putting the locative case after the end of the word. So that seems to be, I'm not going to say it's universal, but it's definitely the case in a lot of polysynthetic languages or agglutinative languages. All right, and now verb structure requirements. So this is the big picture. So all the stuff you can cram into a verb that's like all the stuff that you can cram into a verb is essentially where the meat of a Tuscarora sentence is. Everything goes into the verb. And it follows the same polysynthetic nature of the language, where you essentially just need like pronominal suffixes, the stem, and then, something that goes after it, like some kind of verb thing or some kind of nominalizer or some kind of something that changes it into its intended part of speech. And root modifications can change the action itself. So for example, you might have a word like to tie something, right? And you might add this thing called the reversive, and that will make it untie. You may combine that with the serial, or you may combine that with the punctual. But in the Tuscarora sentence, you need three elements. You need to put who's doing it at the front, as I mentioned earlier in this presentation. You need what they're going to be doing. And you also need to know how the verb unfolds, or its aspect. And everything else that you put in the verb is just icing on the cake. You don't need to have it, right? Like a lemon cake. You don't need to put anything on it if you don't want to put anything on it. It's good the way it is. And there's also this concept of case and valency. So I have seen these before the stem, after the stem. They kind of it just really depends on how the Tuscarora word is constructed. But generally you will use one of these things, like dative, reflexive, causative, or instrumental. Like how did you get somewhere by this means? Like how did you get to school by bus? How did you get to outer space? I got there via spaceship. Or you wrote on a paper with a pencil. Something like that. And you also can add these root modifications. You don't need to have these root modifications, but things like the ennocative, we're going to talk about the reversive here. We're also going to talk about the distributive, because these are more unique aspects of Tuscarora, or to Tuscarora. And then you also have intensifiers, which exist across languages, mainly in the system of reduplication, but not all languages use reduplication for that purpose. And then you also need to have, obviously, the stem formation. You need you can stick nouns in there, like for example, food, make, like in the earlier example, that means to cook. That's essentially what that is. You have food, and then you have another stem that means make, and then you could combine those two and make something else. And so these are not required. You can just combine them, but these are not required. These are just additional stem formation stems, like prefixes like suffixes that you can use. And then you have aspect and mood. So this right here is required. Like if you're in a verb, yes, it's required all the time. So perfective is like a completed action. Like if you might think of like nie sovremia ni vrimia or nie sovremia vrimia in Russian, where the perfective is like an action that happens like you do it one time, it's done, like a one and done deal, essentially. And then the punctual is something that it's like it happens in a fleeting moment, right? And then it's done. It's a little bit faster than perfective, but that's, I mean, it's finished. And then you have serial, which is something that's going on, kind of like serial, followed by the name of this really bad type of person. That's that's like a perfect way of framing it, because like it's not the fact they didn't only do that thing one time. They did that bad thing several times. They kept doing it over and over again, and so that's what makes serial an ongoing or repeated action. And then you have imperative, which is just giving commands to your military. And then we're going to talk about undoing actions, or the reversive. So the reversive is really cool. I have personally never seen this in any language I've ever worked with. Right? Like you would have to say you'd have to say deshacer. You'd have to undo what you're doing. In English, yeah, we have un, but un can also just be the opposite. I don't know. It's a little bit complicated, but this essentially can create new stems, and you can also conjugate this fully as well. Like if you look at this system for undress, like ra, he's undressing, and it all comes from thaneti, which means to get dressed. And you see thaneti, and then in the imperative is just thought netiasi, and this, but it stays the same in all of its forms. So netiasi, netiasi, netiati, netiasi, netiasi. So it stays the same in all of these different forms. And then here at the top, this one is a little bit more complicated, because it's like the clouds got cleared. But this is essentially like a non-human element itself, which you could like see that as like the sky or the cloud itself caused it to come out, right? Or the sky caused this cloud to come out. This non-human entity itself caused the cloud to come out. Reverse. So now you're talking about it caused the cloud to not come out, right? Or it got clear. And punctual meaning it happened in a fleeting moment, like whenever the weather changes in 5 minutes in any place in the world. It's like, oh, you just got a storm when it was sunny 5 minutes ago. That's essentially how this thinking is, and that's what I really love about this. It's like like some Tuscarora words, like they translate it so well, and the way they think of it is like it's literally psychology and action. It's so fascinating, this language is. And then the distributive. So the distributive is one of the more variant forms, right? Because there's 5 different forms depending on what stem you're working with. And I don't exactly know the rules. I'm sure these are covered in Mattoon's grammar. But this is essentially like, if you see something, if you see a person, or if you're looking at like a screen, adding the distributive turns that from looking at a screen to looking around the room. So now that distributive stem allows you to turn your head. Turn your head and look around. Or if you're swimming in one place, you might be swimming at your neighborhood pool, right? That's all people know, is that you're swimming at your neighborhood pool. But if you add the distributive, now you're swimming around, right? You're going to the kiddie pool and hanging out with whoever's over there. You're going to the hot tub and hanging out with whoever's over there. You're going to the deep pool and hanging out with, whoever's over there too. So that's what the distributive allows you to do in Tuscarora. It allows you to extend and scatter out the action that you're doing. So in this example, right here. I think people have already, or most viewers have probably been looking at this already. But this right here, this is a much more complex use of the distributive, because this is not a verb. This is simply something that is generally used with verbs. But the distributive, as I was mentioning to you earlier when we were talking about plurals, they're using the distributive essentially to make this word plural. So you already have an object, right? At us as an object, and then instead of using the noun for, or rather the stem for a house, like their home says, they're using the stem for living. So this is probably why this is in this, like why this was in that section, because it's like in there with live. And because it's distributive, it's essentially like our living spaces that were created, and they're using the perfective because those, like, these have been our homes. There was an action that made our homes this way, so we are here, and this is our community. I really, that's kind of like, this is why I love the polysynthetic nature of this language, because it just expresses things so deeply, and you can see how beautiful words can get. It's like this whole entire thing right here. This whole thing means our various homes. Isn't that so cool? Like, I don't know. This is such a cool language. And then I wanted to put this one up because this is a really interesting one. Okay, this one is about a photo and how the word for photo is constructed. So photo is essentially a non-human object that, a non-human object that, like a non-human object body, right? And in the body that's distributed. And the distributive is only used in the plural version of the word, mind you. Yokerha is a single form, a single body. But when you add distributive, now you're talking about forms, bodies distributed in something. So they're using that distributive to go from this is a single form to forms or bodies distributed in something. It's much deeper of a shape than I had anticipated the word for picture being, because in English we're just like picture, photograph, photo, image. There's not really like they're just like random words that came from places that we don't really know what the etymology of these words is anymore. And so you have I've left the semantic construction here so that for ease, I'm just kind of explaining this, adding my own commentary to these. But yeah. And this one is also interesting. So this kind of sort of reminds me of how Turkish does the whole, like you have the iken thing, or the erek, which is like, erek is like, or, arak, whatever, is like as something is happening. Or whereas iken is like while it's happening. Like it's just while it's happening. Or as I was doing this thing, blah, blah. This is kind of like that, but it's like while you're moving. So if you were to take out the imperative from this sentence would only mean something like they had done it on their way. So you would know that they did something while they were on the way to where you're at, or whatever their final destination was, but you would have no idea that they did it while they were walking on their way, like while they literally did it on their way. It could have been when they stopped at the gas station, or when they were by the tree on this specific road. It could have been any other specific detail, right? But because they added the ambulative there, you know that it happened while they were in a place, like while they were moving, while they were traveling somewhere, That's really cool that you can just put that there, and it just lets you know, like, oh yeah, you guys were actively moving whenever you did that action. Yeah. Oh, okay. You know, like you could tell a story and be like, yeah, I was moving in the car. You would put you would use you would use the ambulative in that case. All right, and adjectives. This is very simple, very very simple. Basically, adjectives function like Spanish. So you put your description after the observation. So the example at the bottom is not a very good example, only because you have to put your pronouns before anyway. Like waquast, it is good. The wa is basically an it in this case. But there, raquanist, you have to say quan after ra, because the ra is like, it's the only stem that they have for, or hara, depending on the case. But ra is the only stem that they have for the masculine, or to represent a man. So there's that. And then in the first example, which is a better example, because this is actually like, it's a noun followed by the adjective, so you could actually see in real time how these are different. So you can see that right after a noun, like that's how it's functioning, right? So if it were to be a standalone sentence, which I don't even know if you can have standalone adjectives in Tuscarora, I'm not really sure you can actually do that. I think they just put all that information into the long word. But you can see that hehun is a field and eo is large. And that shows you that it's, you're going to say a field large and not a large field. So nothing more to say about that. And then the interrogatives, or the question formation, this also is not that complicated. So basically, if you're asking a simple question, so if you ask, you ask, who, what, where, when, why, right? If you ask like katne and katne kye and tawate taherte ne, if you ask these questions, they're generally going to be at the front of a sentence if you're asking a question. However, if any of these interrogatives is taking an object form, like for example, you say something like, I know what I want. He went where I go. Or we're not sure why we're doing that. Those types of situations, they don't have to be worded. They don't have to be sentence initial. These examples are just showing that when you want to use this in real time, you can just put it at the front, followed by the verb and the information that the verb has, because the verb will tell you everything you need to know about the entire sentence. What did you see? So at that very moment, in that fleeting moment, what did you see? Who cooks for you on a regular basis, because you have the cereal being used here. So in any of these cases, no matter what or when it happened, the interrogative will go at the front when you're talking about that. But when it's after, like whenever it's like a complex sense, which I was going to make a section for that, but this presentation's like already coming up on 50 minutes, so there's no way I was going to be able to put that in here. But I did see examples in Mithun's grammar where you can put words like tawate and katne in the middle of a sentence to either separate two clauses, like I don't know, and then the where allows you to make a new clause, I don't know, that's a sentence by itself, and then the where introduces another clause, essentially, or a clausito, a little short clause, where they went. And where they went, that's still a sentence, because you have your verb in there and you have a sentence, where they went. Well, actually, that's not a sentence. But when you combine it with that, then, it's essentially almost a two-clause sentence. I'm sorry, I don't know, my brain's not working now. I've had a long day today, so sorry about that. All right, and that's it. That's essentially it. So if you're really interested in this language, you can check out Mithun's grammar. I've been quoting 1975 in here, but it was written in 1974. So you can look up that, and you can also look up Blair Rood's 1999 Tuscarora English Tuscarora Dictionary, which is available on the Internet Archive site. I think you have to actually have an account to access it, but you can still access it that way. And then if you want to look up more information about the heritage programs they have for Tuscarora Nation, or the language program they have at Bundled Arrows Inc., or any of the other revitalization programs that the tribe or the 3 or more Tuscarora nations are doing, you can also check out these sources as well. So I attempted to translate this. So Nyawe, watkan se. So atkan means to watch something, and I just put the word there because it's like it. It's essentially an it. So I thought I could do thank you for watching it, but my understanding is not. It's very limited. So thank you all for watching. If you've gotten to this point, I really appreciate the support, for real. Thank you for watching this entire video and putting up with all my with all my weird humor. And I will see you all in the next video, which will be about the Telugu language of India. So thank you all for watching. See y'all later.